Okay, I think one just two. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining us today. My name is Augie Pimentel again, and we are here today with EY for our Small Business Strong session to learn more about the Employee Retention Credit. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Sinead Rourke, who is one of our co-chairs here with the Small Business Council at the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. Sinead, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Augie, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Small Business Strong series for today. On behalf of our President and CEO, Maria Salinas, and the LAA Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, and this council, the Small Business Council, I want to thank you so much all for joining us this morning. Before we begin, I want to take a moment also to thank our entrepreneurship and innovation team for making this event possible. I want to thank our sponsors, Wells Fargo, GoBiz, and our Together for LA partners. We could not do this work without any of them. So thank you so much for your support. And today I also want to give a special thanks out to EY for taking the time to join us. EY has been instrumental in supporting the small business community, and I look forward to today's conversation. Without further delay, I would like to introduce Ashley Vincent, Managing Director, and also Lindsay Rice, Senior Manager at EY Workforce Tax Services. Ashley, please take it away.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're here today to talk about the Employee Retention Credit and its applicability to small and mid-sized employers. I'm Ashley Vincent. I'm a Managing Director with Ernst & Young based in Phoenix, Arizona. And my practice has been spending the last many months helping employers understand and claim the COVID-19 Employee Retention Credit. I'm joined today by Lindsay Rice, one of the lead senior managers and subject matter professionals on our Employee Retention Credit team. And before we get started, we would like to ask the first of our two polling questions that we'll be posting during our session today. Our first polling question is to find out how familiar our audience is with the Employee Retention Credit. So we've got this pulled up now. If you could please take a few seconds to answer, we would appreciate it.
Ashley, it looks like we might have had somebody that received a refund from the IRS. That's fantastic.
That's great. We'd like to hear their story, how that went. All right, it looks like we've got about 80% participation, so we'll end the poll here. It seems like the majority are not familiar very much with the Employee Retention Credit, but looking forward to learning more, so thank you for that. We hope today will be a helpful session for you where you find out a lot more information as you consider whether your business could be eligible for this credit. We go to the next slide, please. So for our agenda today, we're going to break down the key things that you need to know if you're interested in claiming the ERC, focusing on the credit's applicability to small and mid-sized employers. And first, we'll provide an overview of what the credit is and some examples of how impactful it can be. And then we'll talk about qualify for the credit with some additional examples regarding eligibility in different industries. And finally, we'll provide you with an overview of the online ERC calculator that EY has developed that can actually help you calculate and claim your credit. If you have any questions during our session today, please go ahead and post them in the chat function, and we'll respond to as many of them as we can during the Q&A time at the end of our session. So with that, I will turn it to Lindsay Rice. Lindsay?
Sounds good. Well, we can start talking about the ERC if we go ahead and flip to the next slide. So it sounds like some of you have heard a little bit about the Employee Retention Credit. It is a refundable payroll tax credit that was originally created under the CARES Act back in March of 2020. So can you believe it? It's 2 years ago now. It has kind of evolved and expanded over time. One of the changes that might be important to this group is that if you did take you can take the ERC even if you also had a PPP loan. So that's one item that did get modified at the end of 2020. Originally, you couldn't take advantage of both programs, but now you can. So having a PPP loan doesn't exclude you from the credit altogether. There are some considerations for not overlapping wages, but you can still be eligible to benefit from both. So I know that's probably something that is important to this group. So we wanted to make sure to point that out. And I also wanted to point out that you absolutely can still take advantage of this program. If you haven't claimed the credit yet, you can still amend your 941s or your quarterly employment tax returns from both 2020 and 2021 to claim the ERC. So we can go ahead and flip to the next slide. Great. So if you're an eligible employer, and we'll talk a little bit about, what that means to be an eligible employer. But if you are, you could be entitled to a fairly significant credit. These are a few examples of employers that we've helped, I guess, over the past 2 years or so, just to kind of illustrate, what the credit can be based on a few different industries here. So an IT consulting company that we worked with only about 10 employees was eligible from Q2 2020 through third quarter of 2021. They also had a PPP loan, so they were eligible for most of the ERC timeframe. But by working around that PPP loan, working around that time frame and making sure we weren't overlapping wages, they still generated about $90,000 in credit. A retail store in California also had a PPP loan in 2020, and only about 7 employees generated a $150,000 credit. A local restaurant in Colorado, only 15 employees met the gross receipts test. We'll talk about what that means. For just 2 quarters, and that's the second and third quarter of 2021, they generated a $200,000 credit. And then also a gym that was impacted by government orders for about 12 weeks in 2020 generated a $250,000 credit, and they had about 50 employees. So I think, the key here is we've seen employers across industries significantly benefit from the ERC. As I mentioned, at this point, you'll be looking back to a previous quarter. So you've already paid these employment taxes on your quarterly employment tax returns. So after you claim the credit through amending a form and sending it to the IRS, you can elect to receive this amount to come back to you in the form of a check from the IRS. So it's very beneficial to employers during what continues to be a tough time for businesses. All right, let's flip over to the next slide. Yeah, so who's eligible? So in terms of eligible employer, your business had to either be fully or partially suspended due to government orders or have a significant decline in gross receipts. So what does that mean? Gross receipts are measured by comparing a calendar quarter in 2020 compared to that same calendar quarter in 2019. And in that case, you had to have at least a 50% decline. Or again, this credit changed over time. If you're looking at a quarter in 2021 and you're comparing it to that same quarter in 2019, in that case, the decline only needs to be about 20%. So this is, an OR test. So you were either impacted by government orders or you had a reduction in gross receipts. Either one of those situations can make you an eligible employer. And then from a credit standpoint, the credit is worth up to $5,000 per employee for all of 2020 and up to $7,000 per employee per quarter in 2021. And the credit goes through Q3 or September 30th of 2021. So altogether, if you're an eligible employer for that entire time frame, then you could generate up to $26,000 in credit per employee. And then, as we think about qualified wages, if you had fewer than 100 full-time employees in 2019, all wages paid to employees are considered eligible for both years. So you may have heard a little bit about the difference here. The rules are a little different for what the IRS considers a large employer. In that case, qualified wages are wages paid when the employee was not providing services. But I'm assuming most folks on this call probably fall into that smaller employer category. And the good news is there that if you are considered an eligible employer, then all wages can count toward the credit. All right, we'll flip to the next slide. So as I just mentioned, you can become an eligible employer either through that reduction in gross receipts or a full or partial suspension due to government orders. So typically, our suggestion suggestion is that you'll want to take a look at your gross receipts first, because if you meet that percentage decline requirement, that by itself is going to qualify you as an eligible employer. But if if that doesn't qualify you and you're trying to determine if a partial suspension is applicable, these are a few examples of employers that we've seen have a partial suspension in a few different industries. So the first example is a retail example. So in this case, a retailer had to close their brick and mortar location due to the local government orders at the beginning of the pandemic. However, online sales did continue, and in this case, those results ended up being even higher than they had been previously. We can still consider this employer partially suspended because their storefront was closed, and that storefront represents more than a nominal amount of their typical business. So it would be a substantial enough piece of the business to create that partial suspension. So I wanted to mention, what does nominal mean? So the IRS has given an example in some of the Q&A defining that the partial suspension needs to be more than a nominal impact. And more than nominal, they've defined as more than 10% of an employer's business. So in thinking about the retailer, the storefront is more than 10% of their typical business. And therefore, with that being shut down, you can consider them partially suspended. The 10% doesn't necessarily have to be related to revenue, or it can be, the impact overall was more than 10%. So you can think about a sales volume, you can think about total employees that would have been impacted. In general, the thought here is that you were partially suspended and it was something that was impactful to your business. It wasn't a small piece of your business that you otherwise could have gone without. So just generally saying partially suspended is more than what you would consider kind of a nominal impact. So moving on to the case of a manufacturer. As we've seen during the pandemic, raw materials, supply chains are often impacted. So if government orders required a supplier to shut down and it led to the manufacturer being unable to purchase the materials that are needed, therefore unable to perform their own operations, this is another example of a partial suspension for that manufacturer. They aren't able to get the resources they need in order to carry on their business due to government orders. And then in the example of a restaurant having to limit indoor seating capacity, I think this one's a common, industry that we've all seen kind of impacted by government orders. But the thought here is that, the restaurant's still able to continue a portion of their business through drive-through, through carry-out, but because that indoor seating capacity was limited, that could create a partial suspension of the restaurant's business. And then the last example here is, even businesses that are considered essential, they may still be considered partially suspended. So in this example, a hospital or medical offices that were required to suspend elective surgeries or non-essential procedures, assuming that that's more than a nominal amount of their business, then again, a partial suspension could apply. Even though they're an essential business, they could still be an eligible employer. Okay, so I think we're going to go to polling question 2. And this is around, did your business take a PPP loan? So either A, yes, we took a first draw or a first and second draw PPP loan, or B, no, my business did not take a PPP loan. And I think some of the results are starting to come in. It's, I think, pretty much what we expected, which is the majority of the folks did take advantage of the PPP loan. So I think our point here that we wanted to make sure you were aware of is that there is a way to navigate both of these programs and gain benefit from both. All right. So, in the topic of the PPP loan, I've said you can certainly take advantage of both. This is an example of what that might look like. So the rule to keep in mind is that the employee wages or the payroll that was used for purposes of loan forgiveness cannot also be counted as qualified wages for the ERC. So in the example you're seeing on your screen, the suspension period for this employer is April 1st through of 2020 through January 31st of 2021. So that would kind of be that time frame of the employer being considered an eligible employer. And then the PPP covered period was from May 1st through September 30th of 2020. So this shows about $500,000 in payroll costs were used toward loan forgiveness. So essentially, any wages that were paid during the time frame of the eligible employer outside of the PPP timeframe, you can certainly count toward the ERC credit. So here you're kind of seeing that it's sandwiching, I guess, for lack of a better word, of that PPP cover period. So before and after the period during the time frame that you're still an eligible employer, those wages can count toward the employee retention credit. And then also, if you had payroll that exceeded the amount that was used for loan forgiveness, then you, within that covered period, you can also use those wages toward the ERC. So you can definitely navigate both programs and have the benefit for both within the same calendar year, as long as you avoid the overlap of the wages.
All right, so if we could just move to the next slide, please. If all of this sounds interesting, and I know maybe some of you have some questions that we can address here in a moment, we just wanted to show you this slide if you have an interest in learning more about what your business's potential credit could be and how to go about claiming your credit. One way that you could find out more information is to check out the online ERC calculator that our team at EY has developed. Via the link that we've included here on the next slide, you can access the calculator online. You can access a free credit estimator within the calculator that you can use to run scenarios and determine the potential impact to your business. Our ERC calculator is designed specifically for small to medium-sized businesses, and it gives you a good online approach to calculating and claiming your credit. So if you have some interest, please feel free to access that, and we're happy to help answer questions that you might have. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we've moved through this information at kind of a high level today, trying to just give you the most important nuggets for you to think a little bit more about. We're at the Q&A portion of our session. We'll review any questions that you have in the chat feature. Maybe Lindsay, you could start checking out if we've had any questions come in. We also have a number of common questions that are asked of us that we're happy to start walking through and addressing if there's no immediate questions.
Yeah, Ashley, I don't see any coming through yet. Feel free to put them into the chat. But I guess in terms of some of the common questions that we have received from employers, if we can move over to the next slide here. One of the biggest questions we get is, what if my business didn't close? So that's actually why we went through all of those examples of partial suspension. That can look very different depending on your industry, depending on your circumstances, but you can be not fully closed, just partially impacted due to the government orders and still be considered an eligible employer. And then we also talked about essential businesses. They can claim the ERC, if a portion of their business, a more than nominal portion of their business was impacted due to government orders. And then here's a question. So how do I determine whether I had fewer than 100 or 500 full-time employees in 2019? Because that's really what's going to make you a small employer for purposes of the ERC. If you're right on that line and you're not sure exactly what that looks like, one of the forms that you can take a look at is your 1094C from 2019. That is the form that's filed with the IRS for purposes of ACA reporting requirements. And what that form does is part 3 of that form, it outlines all of the full-time employees that you have per month. And so that's a really good starting point if you feel like you're right on the edge of that, 100 or 500 employee threshold. Let me just take a look and see if there's anything else in the chat here. We talked a little bit about partial suspension. This is applied to professional services. It can apply to professional services. Typically, so it certainly can apply to professional services as a business. I would suggest in that case, look at your gross receipts first to see if that makes you an eligible employer. If it does not, then the partial suspension is interesting. You want to make sure that your business is truly impacted due to government orders. Now, government orders that basically say that you can't gather in groups of more than 10 people, or that everybody's encouraged to work from home. Sometimes in professional services types environments, we see that people are able to work from home, but really they aren't suspended in any way. They can continue the same type of comparable business that they would in the office. If that is truly your situation, then you probably don't have a more than nominal impact of moving from the office to working from home. On the flip side of that, we've also seen employers that have had, most of their business is related to traveling, and travel was something that was impacted due to government orders, and that might have created a partial suspension. So the facts and circumstances for each employer are very different, but you'll want to make sure that, one, your business is suspended. Two, it's more than a nominal amount. And three, it's due to those government orders, whether they be local or state orders that were in place that really suspended that portion of your business. One of the other common questions we do get that I wanted to touch on today is how long does the process take? So that's a general question. So typically to calculate an employee retention credit, it doesn't take quite so long. But once you have that number and you submit an amended 941, so you send a 941X to the IRS and you're claiming your tax credit, as you can imagine, there's a lot of businesses very interested in getting this tax credit. The IRS has quite a backlog of these forms to process. So right now we are seeing that the time frame for processing from the IRS perspective is somewhere in the ballpark of 4 to 8 months. So it may take that long to actually get your refund check. That said, it would be coming, but it's taking a little bit of time. So you have some time to actually claim the credit. You have 3 years from the date that the employment tax return, the 941, is filed. But our suggestion is, if you're interested in claiming the credit, you move forward as quickly as possible, just because of that waiting time and the backlog that the IRS is currently experiencing. It could take a little while to get the check in the mail.
I think if we could leave you with any message today, it's that I can't tell you how many small businesses we've spoken to that just made the assumption that they would not qualify, either for lack of knowing the rules, which is completely understandable because the IRS sometimes tends to make things a little bit complicated, or just assuming that if they don't qualify due to gross receipts, that they just aren't eligible. I would encourage you to look into it a little bit more. We're happy to answer questions if you'd like to reach out to us. We've been able to find many small businesses credits that they weren't anticipating. So would just encourage you to take a look at this if you haven't already.
And could I just interject something while we're looking for more questions? If anyone has any questions, please add them in the chat. Obviously, Ashley and Lindsay, you guys are experts in this, but can you talk, and we talked about your titles, but just for the purposes of this group, and for me too, it'd be more helpful if we could just learn a little bit more about your roles and what you're doing, and when would people come to you, or when would businesses come to you for solutions?
Sure. So Lindsay and I are part of the indirect tax practice within Ernst & Young, which is a practice that's been around probably close to the inception of the firm. We've served in many roles of our careers. I've personally been with E&Y for 20 years, working, assisting with lots of risk areas based on that role, whether it's dealing generally with HR risk or focusing on the Affordable Care Act. Our practice tends to jump in and address the latest tax issues that are on the table. And so when the employee retention credit arose, our firm not only started helping large businesses capture millions of dollars in credits, but then also came up with this solution through this online tool to help smaller businesses in a more efficient and less costly way address the ERC and find out if they're eligible for it. So Ernst & Young, I think, traditionally is known as a tax and accounting firm, but there are a number of things that we also do to consult with our clients to help them understand impacts to different departments and different business units. And here the ERC is a perfect example of that.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much, Ashley.
Sure. I think we've got another question or two here, Lindsay. Let me scroll up. We've got some time. So I've been having private companies reaching out to me regarding getting help obtaining the employee retention credit.
So in terms of going straight to the source, which would be the IRS. So
Yeah.
the employee retention credit is, kind of an analysis that you're going to do based on this, what I have been talking about related to gross receipts or being fully or partially suspended, making you an eligible employer. As Ashley mentioned, we can certainly help with the calculation of that credit. But the mechanics at that point is, once you have the actual tax credit, you're going to claim it on an amended 941. And so you're going to mail that form to the IRS and the IRS would be processing. So that in terms of going straight to the source, that is, you would receive the refund check directly from the IRS. And that's also kind of why we mentioned the backlog and the time frame there, because we're working with many, many employers. We have seen refunds come through, but they do take a little bit of time. And so that's why we mentioned kind of doing this sooner rather than later and kind of getting in the queue. But as far as the SBA is concerned, this credit, can be and should be processed directly through the IRS through an amended quarterly employment tax return. I will also mention that typically payroll providers can help you file that amended 941 to send to the IRS. EY can help you do that as well. So we can kind of help answer your questions as you go through the process in terms of mechanically how to claim the credit.
And to answer another question about other companies that have approached you, there's a number of companies, either boutique firms or even CPAs that are helping businesses claim the credit. So there's a number of groups out there that can help. Yes, the fees are across the board. That looks pretty high in what you quoted, between $500 to $1,000 per employee. We've heard that there are boutique businesses that are also taking a certain percentage based on the amount of credit they're able to capture for you. That's not what we do. We have a little bit of a different approach. So if you have an interest, you can take a look at our website and we can give you a little bit more information about that as well. We're a little bit less than that. Any other questions? All right, we will make sure to I think Augie will be sending out some follow-up information after this meeting, including the deck, and within the deck, it has a link to our website. I can post it here again in the chat. Additionally, you should have our contact information through the meeting today, so feel free to reach out to either Lindsay or I. We're happy to answer your questions directly or help forward to the team that's helping us work with this credit. So thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you all so much. Sorry again for my internet randomly going out towards the middle of the Q&A section, but I'm glad you were all able to continue the conversation. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and actually introduce to you, if you haven't seen it already, the Safer at Work portal. So it's a great resource available for employers to help build and create a safer workplace environment around COVID-19 for your businesses and for your employees as well. So I'm going to quickly stop sharing my screen and then I'm going to jump into the website. And in just a little bit, I'll also post the website link as well for you all to see, and so you can follow along. 1 second. All right, I think when my internet went up, I also lost the website link. 1 second. Alrighty, so once you come to the website, this is the Safer at Work portal. So like I said, this is a great tool for you to use as employers to help build that safe workplace environment to protect your businesses and your workers. The main area we're going to be looking for within the site is actually going to be this employers tab right here. So we're going to go ahead and select learn more. Within this page, it'll direct you to a couple of key topics that are centered around COVID-19. And these are all of the topics that this page will go into further detail about. So when you click on one of them, it'll go ahead and lower you down to the section that it's located on the page. So I'll just quickly do a quick overview of what some of these topics include. So this is a COVID-19 employer portal. This is going to be the main one we'll be focusing on, which I'll come back to in just a little bit. But some of the other topics include vaccines in the workplace, and I'll have subtopics listed below it. So when you want to dive further into detail about these, you could select one of these and learn more about them. And then there's also a topic around COVID-19 emergency temporary standards. And then there's also a section on what to do and how to create a safer and healthier workplace. And then another section around what to do in case one of your employees gets sick or they become exposed to COVID-19 as well. And again, all of these have subtopics where you can go into further detail as well. And then at the very bottom of this page, there's a training and resources section for more information for you and for your employees as well. So as I mentioned, we're going to go over the employer portal. However, when I checked on this page earlier today, it was under maintenance. So we're going to check it out again today, see if it's still under maintenance. And it is. But nonetheless, it is a very easy portal to navigate through, because once you click on this page and once it's fully operating, there's only two main questions that you need to answer. And that first question is, what is the industry that you are operating within? And you could select either one or multiple industries depending on the nature of your business. And then the second question is, what is the county in which your business operates within as well? Once you answer those two questions, it'll then generate a report for you with basically all the guidelines around the COVID-19 specific to your industry within your county as well. And it provides the most up-to-date information as well. So it's a really great resource to come to if you're hearing that there's updates being made in your local area. And after you've entered those two questions, then you're able to download the report and save it onto your computer, or you could have it emailed to yourself. And like I said, you could continuously check up on this resource and update it just to make sure you're getting the most up-to-date information as well. But that's pretty much it. As right now, it is saying that maintenance is in progress. And so when you click on this employer page, it's just going to take you right back to that main page that I took you to originally. So you could go ahead and dive further into those details as well. All right, and that's pretty much it for the employer portal. So what I'm going to do is go back to the presentation, and 1 second. All right, and then we're going to wrap it up with some closing announcements. So Shanae, if you're still with us, I could go ahead and hand it right back over to you.
Yes, I am with you, Augie. I am in the car. So if I could ask if you could just go over some of those announcements. This information today, though, has been really valuable. And so obviously I appreciate what Ernst & Young has done, but also the Small Business Council and the Chamber on behalf of Maria. As many of you know, some of our council members are in Sacramento during our legislative days, but we really appreciate all of you being here today. So Augie, if you could just wrap up with some of that comment, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, of course, no problem. All right, so first things first. So we are still accepting applications for our Resilient Business Advising Program. So this is a great opportunity for businesses who are looking to get some free one-on-one advising. We do have a team of really talented professionals who all specialize in different areas that can help you and your business with whatever it is you're looking for, whether it's accessing resources, getting a better understanding of your marketing strategy, how to implement those health and safety protocols, and then also how to secure local and state federal contracts. And then you also get exposed to the suite of small business resources that we have here at the Chamber. And you get up-to-date information with some of these workshops that we're hosting like this one today, and also from anything that we are able to discuss during our Small Business Council meetings as well. Next one. So our next webinar is going to be our Doing Business With session. This is going to be with the LA County. So this is going to be on the 28th, so next Thursday. So feel free to join us for that. It does start at 10 a.m. as well. And then again, this link for the registration will also be sent out with an email along with all the other links that we mentioned today. And then lastly, next month is Small Business Month, but our event is called Vision of Inclusion, Celebrating Small Businesses. So we're going to be celebrating small businesses all month of May. we do have a marquee event on May 12th. So I will also be sending out a link so you can join our newsletter. So once we have more information and details about the event, you can stay tuned, make sure you're getting all up-to-date information. And you could also see all of the partner events that will be promoting as well to celebrate small businesses throughout the month of May. All right, so with that, I would like to thank you on behalf of the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce and UI. We thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you again in our next meeting. Again, the recording as well as this presentation slides and all of the links will be sent out via email later on today. So thank you all for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of your day and see you soon. Thank you all.